This is Still Enrolled.
And welcome on into the Still Enrolled, a Big Ten football podcast. As always, it is Ryan Hickey alongside Brian Tripp. Welcome. Thank you for making us a part of your days. We got a huge week 2 to react to here. The big game of Saturday, the biggest game I would say so far in college football, Michigan, Texas. It was a blowout in the Big House. We'll get to that. Speaking of blowing out, Nebraska handled Colorado. A few other impressive performances as well. We'll get into here. So much news to dive into here from what was a packed, locked, and loaded week 2. Tripp, let's go.
Let's do it. If you were sitting down on Saturday to watch, you're hyped. I can't wait to watch Texas, Michigan, Nebraska, Colorado, 2 games over at halftime. But you did, if you went off the radar, or if you're watching college football, and I know it's not a Big Ten game, but Alabama, USF, Oregon-Boise State, if you could stay up late to watch the Big Ten after dark, there were some really good games. Penn State, Bowling Green, there were some really good games this past weekend. It just wasn't the games with the national hype that maybe you were hoping were really good games. And I didn't even mention Notre Dame losing to NIU at the end. The blocked field goal, 16-14, which may have playoff implications moving forward as well. But obviously we want to start with Michigan, Texas, a game where I think everything had to go right for Michigan to have a chance. Everything did not go right for the Wolverines, and some serious, serious questions for Michigan coming out of Saturday's 31-12 defeat, which was really a 31-6 game basically until the end.
You're right, and that's like, when you look at how this game went, right? You talked about it. I talked about it. We had Anthony Brumam of On 3. He talked about it as well. The path to, or the keys to victory here for Michigan, if they want to win this game, what do they have to do? Obviously, play great defense. Run the ball effectively. Win the turnover battle. Not just win it, but win it significantly where you are +2, +3 versus Texas. Everything we outlined for that Michigan needed to do, that they needed to have go right for them in order to win this game, the opposite happened. They lost a turnover battle by a wide margin. They could not run the ball consistently. That defense got carved up. And now that we're sitting here, 48 hours or so removed from the game, I really don't think it's that surprising. Like we talked about on Thursday's pod going in, you look at Michigan, and while they do have some big names on the defense, you look at the other 8 guys, they're just not good enough compared to what we saw in previous years for Michigan's defense and why they were one of the best defenses in all the country. It wasn't just 2-3 guys. It was a full squad and really great depth as well. That depth is lacking. Even that high-end talent outside of Will Johnson, Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, there's not much else. And we saw Quinn Ewers, one of the best quarterbacks in college football, have a field day where, especially in the first half, the run game was not a threat. Michigan's defense knew what was coming, where Texas struggled to run the ball early, and it didn't matter. Converting, it felt like on every third down, guys were running open. Ewers was using his legs to make plays as well. I really now that we're 40 hours removed, Tripp, I don't think what we saw in the Big House on Saturday is really that surprising.
No, I agree with you on that. And Texas's defense creates 3 turnovers in the game. Just to emphasize how rare it has been for Michigan to lose at home, it snaps a streak of 23 straight home victories. As we talked about on the podcast previewing the game, their last loss at home, 2020, their last loss with fans in the seats was against Ohio State in 2019 at the Big House. But it was 24-3 at halftime, 31-6 before the late Michigan touchdown. Michigan does not have a running game right now. 23 carries, 80 yards. And what impressed me about Texas, sure, it's the big plays, and Ewers had a big game, and you had concerns. What does Michigan have in the secondary outside of Will Johnson, who was only thrown at 1 time in the entire game? Texas out-physicaled Michigan. They had 135 yards after contact in this game. Michigan, 23 carries, 80 yards. They're just not getting the production of what they need from their... Texas won this game in the trenches. You can talk all about the big plays, the explosive plays. Texas won this game in the trenches, and that... I don't know that I expected Texas to be that dominant in the physical aspect of the game going in. To amplify how bad Michigan was, or maybe how good Texas was, right? Certainly have Texas a true legitimate national championship contender going into the Big House, and Michigan proving that they're not a national championship contender. They're really going to have to turn things around to be a playoff contender and a Big Ten contender. But Michigan's first 8 drives, 3 plays, 3 yards, punt. 9 plays, 55 yards, field goal. 3 plays, 8 yards, interception. 6 plays, 19 yards, fumble. 1 play, -2 yards, half. 5 plays, 17 yards, punt. 9 plays, 41 yards, field goal. 1 play, no yards, interception. So that is 2 of their first 8 drives go for more than 17 yards and only end up in a pair of field goals.
That highlighted with questions we had going in of how Michigan was going to keep up, Trip. And again, for me, this game not being surprising. I say that not to brag or whatever, but I say that to say what I'm about to say. What the hell was Michigan doing this offseason when they had a quarterback room of Davis Warren, unproven, Alex Orji, project. Jaden Davis was a highly, ranked recruit, but still now coming as a true freshman. It's not, to me, a surprise with what you just outlined with Michigan's offense, how inept they were. They struggled last week for a large part of the Fresno State game as well. Mm-hmm. What was Sharon Moore thinking? What was Michigan as a program looking at when they felt comfortable and saying, we don't need to get any quarterback in the transfer portal? There were plenty in there that were talented. We're going to stick with what we have. I don't know what they were thinking, Trip. And now 2 games in, they're paying the price, and you can already count that decision to stand pat at quarterback a gigantic loss.
For Michigan to have success, they have to play complementary football, right? The same thing we outlined on Thursday. Run the ball well, don't turn it over, make sure the defense has the opponent pin deep, win the field position battle, right? There's still a formula there for success for Michigan, but they're so one-dimensional. And at one dimension is a running game that I think part of the reason it didn't get on track, obviously, is they weren't as physical as Texas. But a big part of the reason they're not having success running the ball right now is because the passing game is not a threat. Colston Loveland at tight end is their top target, 8 receptions, 70 yards, but he's still a tight end, right? He's not going to stretch the field. Samej Morgan is a legitimate weapon at receiver, but that they don't have. That's it. Right. Davis Warren, is he going to consistently going to be able to get the ball out there? Alex Orji, they don't allow to pass, so you know exactly what's happening the 2 times he came into the game. Jaden Davis, when does he get his chance? The guy we might see at quarterback for Michigan is a name familiar to Big Ten fans because he's been around, is Jack Tuttle. Jack Tuttle might be, I wouldn't be surprised if healthy, we see Jack Tuttle as the next possible solution for Michigan at quarterback. But they have a lot of work to do after that game against Texas.
That they do. Jack Tuttle, the old man, he'll bring experience, at least in terms of life experience and not much game experience. But hey, it's at this point, nothing I think can be ruled out. And if you're Michigan now looking forward, I mean, clearly not a college football playoff, or clearly not a national title contender. I would say clearly not a college football playoff contender, Big Ten contender. I think what you saw on Saturday will kind of reign true when Oregon comes to town in a few weeks, even when USC comes to town in a few weeks as well. That's a game where I feel very good about the Trojans. Like Ohio State still, like they have 3 games left, bare minimum.
They have to go to Illinois too now. Like all of a sudden, it's week 2, right? Everyone overreacts week 1. We're going to overreact in week 2. But now that we have 2 weeks of sample size, and we're going to get to this on the pod today, like Illinois' stock is definitely up after upsetting Kansas. And that is a physical football team that played really good complementary football against the Jayhawks, got a defensive score. Quarterback Luke Alkmaar didn't turn the ball over. What Illinois did with Bret Bielema, and they got a couple. Now, I think they have more weapons at wide receiver based on what we saw in the upset of Kansas. But what Illinois did against Kansas is what Michigan needs to do to have success in 2024. And the one element we didn't talk about with Michigan is their linebackers really, really struggled against Texas. The 154 rushing yards, Gunnar Helm, the leading receiver for Texas, the tight end, and the running backs combined for 8 receptions. So, you start looking, Michigan, right, we're going to talk about them, stock down, but Illinois, 23-17 over Kansas, their first win against a ranked non-conference opponent at home since 2011. Big-time win with the formula that Michigan needs. That's a kudos to Bret Bielema and Illinois, what I thought was a really impressive 23-17 win over the weekend.
Speaking of which, let's get to that game. I felt really good about my Texas prediction over Michigan. That proved out to be right. You were very high and bullish on Illinois, way more than I was going into this game. You were proven right. Like you said, that was a really strong win for the Illini. And now going forward here, it really does. You look at Illinois, maybe not as a Big Ten contender, but a team that could really now give you trouble and is no longer an easy W, that kind of the way we thought going into the year. And it's the defense forcing turnovers, making plays. It's Luke Altmaier, for the most part, making good decisions. Zakari Franklin coming in as, the leading, at least active wide receiver in college football now, making, the one-handed catch he had down the sideline, just sticking his hand out there, grabbing it. It was unbelievable. But now Illinois, with Bret Bielema, you knew they were going to play tough, hard-nosed defense. That's been, something that every Bret Bielema coach team, that's one of the pillars that they have. But now you're seeing a more modern offense. It's not 3 yards in a cloud of dust. Now Altmaier's making plays with his arm, making plays with his legs. It's still that tough, hard-nosed defense, but now you're getting a modern college football offense that now makes this Illini team. What we saw Saturday is not a fluke. It was not luck. It was not just everything went right for one game and they can't replicate that. This team now, they're knocking on the door. They're 26th in the country, first team out of the top 25. They're now a real threat, and really what is going to be, I think, a pain in the ass for every team they have to face now going forward the rest of the year.
Yeah, and for them, you mentioned it may be a different style of offense, but it's still the same philosophy. Luke Altmaier is good enough, and it seems like that receiving core is good enough. Pat Bryant, 3 receptions, 70 yards. He had 2 long receptions on their go-ahead touchdown drive late in that game as they rallied to win it against Kansas. They still need to be efficient with the football because they're not built to come from behind. But if they can put that defense in good spots, that defense held Jalen Daniels to 141 yards. They had 3 interceptions. Xavier Scott had a pick 6 in that game that changed the game for Illinois. That is their recipe for success. It might not be 3 yards in a cloud of dust with 8 offensive linemen in the game, but it still is the same philosophy. Don't beat ourselves on offense. Make just enough plays, and let's play really strong defense. And now people believe, too. They sold out Memorial Stadium for the first time since 2016. It starts to look like Bret Bielema, who had Illinois trending in the right direction, that last year maybe is an anomaly as you install that new offense and put the reins of the team into Altmaier's hands instead of the running game. Maybe last year is just a hiccup and a bump in the road. It's a lot to say after week 2 and 1 impressive win, but it is an impressive win for Illinois. We'll learn a lot more in the next 6 weeks. In 2 weeks, they go to Happy Valley to play a top 10 Penn State team. They play Michigan. They play Oregon. So 3 teams that entering last week were in the top 10. They have 3 games against top 10, top 15, top 20, teams in the next 6 weeks.
I'm glad you mentioned the buy-in and the first sellout in 8 years, because you look at that reaction after the game. Crowds going crazy. Bielema's firing up. That now can be a good home field advantage, where for the most part, we've seen it, in the Bret Bielema era, for the most part, even in previous regimes, that is a sleepy environment. Where mostly it's an 11 a.m., local kick for a lot of these games. Stadium's half full. No one's really into it. It's one of the easier road environments in the Big Ten. And now you're seeing this year the buy-in. Now you're seeing, like you said, the first sellout since 2016. Fans are invested. And now all of a sudden you continue to stack up these wins. It is going to be a tough place to play and make it even more difficult now to beat Illinois than just the play on the field.
And how about Bielema saying that there was a pick play that he knew Kansas was going to run? He identified that to the officials, and it ends up being called against Kansas. And he's a good football coach. He's been around a long time. Does Illinois have the talent Are they in the right area to recruit? Are they going to be able to in the modern college football with NIL and financials? Can Illinois compete in the Big Ten? I don't know. But he's a guy who is going to at least maximize, I think, what he can do with that football program.
And it's a build, right? It starts here, keep stacking wins.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that helps bring talent in. And like I said, maybe you can – will you ever reach the likes of Ohio State or Oregon, Penn State, Michigan? Probably not, but could you be maybe the best of the second tier? Like there's an absolute path for that. And again, 1 year things line up. You can be a real contender. Schedule breaks your way. Because about 10, 11 wins for the Illini. Big time win there for Illinois. They upset Kansas, knocking on the door of a top 25 ranking, first team out of the AP poll, at least going into week number 3. All right, let's go to a team and a game that featured a team unranked before the game, now has a number next to their name. That was Nebraska. I mean, you talk just about a flat out bullying of Colorado. Nebraska leaned on that defensive line, pushed that porous Colorado line, offensive line all over the field. Just was in Shedeur Sanders' grill all game long. Nebraska threw the first punch and tripped. Not only did Colorado not respond, it seemed like they had no desire to even try to make this a fight whatsoever. Nebraska took it to them early and just beat the will out of the Buffs.
In this game, you had the team with all of the hype and attention, but Nebraska's the team that, if you're following college football, people have been hyping about the trajectory of Matt Rule's program with a young freshman quarterback who once again did not turn the ball over. Nebraska didn't turn the ball over. They create the pick six and never look back. 28-0 at halftime. Hold Colorado to 16 net rushing yards. A big part of that because there's no quarterback who's sacked more in college football than Shedeur Sanders. But it's not only what Dylan Raiola has done for the Nebraska offense, right? Not amazing numbers, 23 for 30, 185 and a touchdown, but he's commanding the game. It's not, though, just that. The black shirt defense might be back with those 6 sacks, the pick six, and 9 different players had a tackle for loss in that game. You put the two together, everyone's talked about how their schedule kind of stacks up for the first 7 weeks of the season. And yeah, the hype train is starting to roll, not for Colorado, but Nebraska, and for good reason. This looks like a Nebraska team that is going to keep getting better. Their confidence is going to keep growing, and they should keep winning based on what they have on their schedule coming up.
They have one of the best defensive lines in the country. That showed out Saturday big time. And I like what you said about Raiola. Like it was fine. But I think that's honestly, if you're a Nebraska fan, even more encouraging that he was fine and this team won handily. They didn't need him to be great, and he never got too antsy, never got impatient. Like he just took what the defense gave him. For the most part, kept the ball out of harm's way. Ironically enough, the only touchdown pass he had was the most dangerous pass he threw at over the middle of the field across his body. Probably should have been picked. Instead, gets a lucky bounce. It was kind of one of those nights for the Cornhuskers, but he's really making good decisions, which is good to see. Taking care of the ball, not feeling like he has to insert himself, allowing the game to play itself out. And that is really encouraging now going forward for a young quarterback that is not trying to do too much. And now, like you said, you look at Nebraska's schedule, they will be favored and should win every game to Ohio State. And now you look at the last 3 games of that season where you're at USC, you play Wisconsin at home, and you're at Iowa. If you win 2 out of those 3 games, you look at USC, that could be a top 15-ish opponent. Win on the road would be very impressive. And now you mentioned before Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois, a team that I, at least, and a lot of people thought were a shoo-in after winning week 1 at Texas A&M, that Notre Dame was going to be making the college football playoff. You lose as a 28-point home favorite. You look at their schedule going forward. Notre Dame's schedule is the easiest in the country, where Florida State comes to town. They don't seem like they're going to get anything together anytime soon. And you're at USC to end the year. You look at Nebraska's resume versus Notre Dame's. If Nebraska is able to beat USC and USC does beat Notre Dame, it could be a path here for the Cornhuskers more than maybe ever to make the college football playoff, in large part thanks to Northern Illinois, what we saw on Saturday.
Yeah, I'm not ready to make the jump of them being a playoff team yet, but there's certainly, if you're a Nebraska fan, there's really good reason to be optimistic. And they're going to have a winning record. In the beginning of the year,
Hot
for
take.
me, that's where I was. Hey, this is a program that hasn't had a winning record since 2016. Matt Rule is a legitimate program builder. And in this new modern era of the Big Ten, not only is it how do you compete against some of these upper echelon teams, but you need the schedule to break your way. And the schedule breaks their way this year. And there is no question that they're a team that deserves a lot of attention the next couple of weeks.
Would you say that they were the team that benefited the most from Notre Dame losing?
I think it's too early to make that jump. I do. And Notre Dame, as you talked about, their schedule is still not incredibly difficult. They go 11-1, 10-2. Notre Dame is going to be in contention to go to the playoffs.
Oh, absolutely. But I think if you were Nebraska, right, like you look at strength of schedule, who Notre Dame beats.
Right. I think the Big Ten benefits from Notre Dame losing. I don't know if there's a single team. I think there's a conference that can. I think the Big Ten and the SEC do.
Right.
The Big 12 might for a second team getting in out of the Big 12, but it's still way too early, I think. But I think everyone in the country benefits from Notre Dame losing just because it opens up a spot in the playoffs. But I don't think you can pinpoint one team right now.
Okay, that's fair. I would say at least right now, Nebraska's in pole position to where if a team that we thought was a shoo-in to be in is out, you look at their schedule, 10-2. You do, I think, need a quality win here. So you have to win at USC. You got to hope Iowa, kind of turns it around. But I think that's I would say that
those are all
odds.
like extreme to look that far down the road. Like, all right, what happens in week 3? What happens in week 4? Like, it's hard to win in college football.
Me jumping the gun, extrapolating 2 months in advance. I've never been accused of that trip. No one has ever said, Ryan, you are crazy. Well,
that would be like Iowa being up at 13, being up at halftime, 13-0, and assuming the game is over against Iowa State. But to Kirk Ferentz's credit, he said at halftime, hey, it's a long way from over. But this was not a game as Iowa State wins it. Game-winning field goal right at the end, 54 yards, 20-19 over the rival Hawkeyes in Iowa City at Kinnick. This wasn't a game that Iowa State won. This was a game that Iowa lost. They waste 187 yards for Caleb Johnson on the ground, who ran the ball really well. Iowa goes inside the Iowa State 5 twice and only comes up with 2 field goals. They had a 1st and goal at the 1 in the second quarter and another 1st and goal at the 3, but only came away with 2 field goals. In the second half, they started to chase points when they were up 19-7. And McNamara, who's been around forever, and I don't expect him to make every throw. He was 13 for 29 in the game, didn't even have 100 yards passing. But you can't turn the ball over. You're Iowa. You can't turn the ball over. Iowa, Illinois, and Michigan all have very similar formulas for success. Offense needs to make a play or two and not put the defense in a bad spot. McNamara knows better than that. This was not a game Iowa State won, but Iowa lost, and it is a bad loss for the Hawkeyes.
You're right. I would say for me, this was the most surprising result of the weekend. Even in part going in because this has been a rivalry that Iowa's owned, and they were 7-1 the last 8 Cy-Hawk games. They always play this game no matter how dynamic Iowa State is in offense. We've seen Brock Purdy struggle to beat Iowa. Like, they always turn this game and play it on their terms. Iowa's done a great job of controlling the pace, muddying it up, slowing Iowa State down if they have a dynamic offense. And through the first half, you saw that. I mean, it took Iowa State, like almost the entire first half to get a real first down, not aided by a penalty.
Yep.
Like, they couldn't move the ball whatsoever. Rocco Becht was, rattled and wasn't making very good decisions. And so you're up 13-0 at a half. Iowa State can't get anything going whatsoever. I said this game's over. Like, this is an easy win. Iowa's moving on. They're 2-0. Yet again, they won this game on their terms. And you see how quickly it flipped in the second half. You see how, like you said, Iowa played very un-Iowa-like football where they're turning the ball over. They're making some bad mental mistakes. They're not getting off the field on third down. They're allowing some big explosive plays in the secondary. They're not causing turnovers. And that formula that they have been so consistent at and have been one of the best in college football at just being disciplined and doing what they need to do to win, that flipped on its head in the span of 30 minutes. At least for me, biggest surprise of the weekend.
And I remember talking when we were doing our previews at the beginning of the year. We're like, Iowa, they've got enough talent. There's enough there. Can they win 10 games? And my answer was no, because they're going to play a lot of games where a team hangs around. And for whatever reason, Iowa is going to, just because of they don't have the depth of talent, they don't have the offense that an Ohio State, a Penn State, and Oregon has in the Big Ten, they're going to lose games simply because they make a big mistake and they're not good enough to not talented enough. They don't have the depth of talent to overcome those types of mistakes. And this is a quintessential Iowa, how the hell did we get here loss, where they are the better team. I think they still are the better team. They're the better team in almost every game they play, but they're not good enough being the better team to win all of them. And that is exactly what we saw unfold on Saturday with a quarterback who just cannot, with his experience, I don't care if he's making plays or not, you just can't make the game-changing mistake. He did, then they compounded it with coaching mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
It was, you want to say it's bizarre, but you kind of expected at some point for something like this to happen to Iowa.
And credit to Iowa State, they beat them at their own game.
Mm-hmm.
That second half, they beat Iowa, how mostly Iowa beats everybody else. And like Cade McNamara, I believe it was the first interception he thrown across his body in like a wheel route that was never open. That's like a high school mistake where it's like, I'm throwing this no matter what. And it's almost like you close your eyes and throw it. And even if it's covered, hope you get lucky. You can't make that mistake with someone of his experience, but especially you can't make that mistake with Iowa's offense being the way it is. Even though they're running the ball well, the margin of error is so thin where, like you said, you score one touchdown down on the goal line, they win this game. But because the razor or the margin is so thin, you get held to 6 points instead of 7. That is the difference here in a 1-point loss at home in a heated rivalry game. Credit to Iowa State for coming back here in the second half and winning this game.
Whereas, right, like Oregon, 37-34 over Boise State, Penn State, 34-27 over Bowling Green. They still found a way to get it done. It certainly was not Penn State's best day on Saturday. Certainly was not Oregon's best day on Saturday. Boise State, legitimate, right, group of 5 team that might be the best group of 5 team, could have a shot at the college football playoff, have a running back who has 9 touchdowns in his first 2 games of the season. Bowling Green might win the MAC, but no one expected 2 teams that were 3 touchdown underdogs or more to go into those environments and put up the fight that they did. So any concern with Oregon or Penn State after close wins? Penn State, impressive week 1 win at West Virginia. Come back home opener, Bowling Green, noon game, a little wet in the morning, sun pops out. Oregon, though, back-to-back weeks, got some heat at home. Any concern with either of those?
Let's start with Oregon, because there, to me, is real concern. Like, you look at last week, I wrote off last week against Idaho. It's college football, right? You're not going to be perfect. Mm-hmm. There were plenty of times where college football players look at their opponent, we got this, no worries, not focused, and balls bounce your way, just so weird things happen. Oregon gained a ton of yards, couldn't put a lot of points, win the game, but way obviously closer against Idaho than it should have been. I really thought they would come out after last week, come out focused, aggressive, intense, and just put the boots to Boise State to start and kind of run away with the game. And you look at how that game played out. A lot of the concerns from last week carried over and were magnified even more this week. Boise State's a really good team, and I think for me at least will be the college football playoff representative for the group of 5. So it's not like you're facing Idaho 2.0. But with that said, the game plan for Boise State was well known. Ashton Jeanty, 267 and 6 touchdowns in week number 1. You knew if you were Dan Lanning going to this game, they were going to run the ball, stack the box, try to take him away. And instead, what happened? Jeanty had another huge game. Ran for 192 yards, 3 touchdowns, could not be stopped, ripping off a big run late. The Ducks defense had no answer whatsoever. You mentioned the offensive line, you're concerned last week. They did nothing to quell that concern this week. 4 sacks in the first half of Dylan Gabriel. And so I am concerned about Oregon. They do have some real leaks on their defense. Their offensive line, for how experienced it is, I mean, they're going through rotations now. They're trying to find the right 5 guys, which is never a good thing in season to try to be experimenting like this. Oregon, I am concerned. I had them right now as a better team than Ohio State. I had them winning the national title game, winning the Big Ten. And you look at the Ducks right now through one game, I think you can excuse. 2 games now in a row at home where you're holding out for dear life and your flaws are being exposed. There's real reason for concern right now if you're an Oregon Ducks fan that this team is not as consistent, not as good as we thought in the preseason.
Yeah, to your point, I'm not concerned because the result with Boise State was close. Like, Boise State's a good team. I'm concerned because of the recurring themes from week 1 to week 2 of where they struggled are real issues again for Oregon. And I think you're dead on with that. Meanwhile, like Penn State, to go on the road to West Virginia and win big in week 1, you have a bye week coming up in week 3. Penn State defensively was not good in the first half. Bowling Green scored on all of its drives in the first half. But to come back out, only allow 80 yards in the second half, hold Bowling Green to 3 points, end of the game. Drew Aller continued to look like, with the exception of one throw in the end zone at the end of the third quarter where Penn State didn't have to run a play. Aller looked like the guy he was in week 1. It's a game Penn State could have put away there and didn't. They let Bowling Green hang around, which is always dangerous if you allow a team to stay in a game. But because their defense came up with 2 interceptions in the fourth quarter, they were down KJ Winston, who might be their best defensive player. It's 1A and 1B with Abdul Carter. Aller being able to utilize his tight end. They had over 200 yards throwing, 200 yards rushing. Both running backs, Singleton and Allen, go over 100 yards. I still think there's a lot of really good things that Penn State did in that game. I just think they got one half from their defense. Their offense wasn't super effective in the second half, despite playing really well in the first half. They made the explosive plays. For Penn State, I think it was, hey, here's a close game at home. Bowling Green maybe a little bit overlooked, one of the better teams in the MAC, but not real concern for me for Penn State, even though it was a game way tighter than anyone thought it would be.
I agree. And you look at the circumstances, like you said, really emotional, impressive week 1 win on the road. We probably maybe should have seen a letdown spot coming more than, at least I'll speak for myself. I did go into this game. I thought it'd be an easy win for Penn State. And like you said,
but no one expects that. Like, even if a team is a letdown, and I can tell you from being on the sideline, Penn State did not match the urgency and physicality that Bowling Green had. And Bowling Green's running backs were physical. You have a quarterback, Bazelak, who's been around the Big Ten before, played for Tom Allen at Indiana. Penn State they weren't up like you were hoping they would be up for that game. No matter how you can say let down or not, you never expect a Penn State defense to allow 24 points in the first half, let alone against Bowling Green. Ohio State, that's not typical of a Penn State defense. Because they were able to bounce back the way they did, I think you can chalk it up to an anomaly. But still, 24 points in a half for a Penn State defense is unheard of. You're
absolutely right. Last thing here, because I'm curious with your perspective, did you get a sense of this pregame? Like, could you look around, see the team?
I've been to enough games where you really do have. I've seen some teams have the best pregame warm-up and be completely locked in and then come out and lay an egg. You can also get overhyped during pregame warm-ups. No, you can never get a sense. And I think Penn State and Oregon are 2 examples of really good teams, found a way to win. There are teams throughout the year that are you're going to have a bad day, but the really good teams still win on their bad day. It's college football. It is hard to win. You should celebrate success. And I think that, especially with Penn State in this instance, that's the case for them on Saturday. They got it done. All right, learn from it, move on, but not really indicative of where the Nittany Lions may be trending the rest of the year.
You are right. It's 18 to 22-year-old kids. It's college football. Every team, Georgia, Ohio State, they're going to have one game. You're like, what the hell is going on? Remember last year, Ohio State, Rutgers, is like a close game late in the second half. It does happen. I would agree with you. I would just kind of chalk that up to one of those days. You win, get out of there. That's all that matters. In a 12-team playoff, as you saw in Notre Dame, the most important thing is win. So for Oregon and Penn State, at least you could say, hey, we're undefeated. There's no blemishes in the loss column so far. Definitely I'm with you. More concern for Oregon, some legitimate concern for the Ducks out of the first 2 weeks now compared to the Nittany Lions.
Does that mean, in your opinion,
Sure.
does that mean in your opinion, and I know we're going to dive into this with the stock, who's rising, who's not, like for Oregon, do you take them out of, like, how would you rank the class of the Big Ten right now? Is it Ohio State, then everybody else? Is it Ohio State and Penn State and everybody else? Is it still Ohio State, Oregon, Penn State? Or is Ohio State now as the only top 5 team in the league? They haven't played anybody yet, but they've looked the part. You know, Smith has been great. Howard's been great. Their defense, Judkins, the two-headed monster at running back. Is it Ohio State and everybody else right now? Or what's your feeling on how the Big Ten stacks up?
I would say so. I would say Ohio State is in a class of their own. I had Oregon and Ohio State in the same class to begin the year.
Mm-hmm.
I think now I would knock Oregon down to the same tier. I would put 3 teams in tier number 2. Penn State, Oregon, USC, probably in that order as well. But I think Ohio State, I know they've not, like you said, they've not played anybody. So it's not like they've been actually tested. But to their credit so far, 2 opponents they should have handled, and they've done exactly that. Where you look at Oregon, we just talked about some real concern. Penn State, look, it's a letdown. Bowling Green is probably better than we think. But so I just don't think from a talent perspective, Penn State matches up right now with Ohio State. I think Ohio State has a superior roster, so that's why I'll give them the advantage there in tier number 1. And USC is really impressed so far, Miller Moss and this defense as well. So I think they have catapulted themselves into this tier number 2. But I think after 2 weeks, it's Ohio State for me, and those 3 teams, Penn State, Oregon, USC, in tier number 2. How about you? How would you rank that?
Yeah, and I think the Big Ten still has a chance for 3 to 4 college playoff teams. But I would agree with you with Nebraska trending up, right? Michigan maybe trending down. I know we're going to get into here the teams with stock rising and stock falling. And for me, it's 2 weeks. Even at this point, most reactions are an overreaction. But the Big Ten, you felt great about the Big Ten coming out of week 1. Coming out of week 2, I still feel really good about the Big Ten, but maybe not in the same way with the same teams I felt at the beginning of the year.
And they still do have 4 teams in the top 11, now with USC climbing up. So it's not like, it's been a abject failure so far. And the Big Ten is disappointing. Like they still have, some of the highest ranked teams in the country, at least still up there. But you're right. I think through 2 weeks, you really look at Oregon as a team that everyone thought was a national title contender. So far, it's underwhelmed. And so a few surprises, Nebraska, USC as well. There's been good balance so far in the conference, which I think is what you want as well. Speaking of which, right, it's not just the teams at the top that are surprising, that are pressing. It's also teams in the middle and the bottom that right now are having some good wins. After 2 week strip, because now we can get 2 games, a little bit more accurate sample size than just an overreaction after week number 1. Who's a team, I should say, that you are really impressed with? You would say that their stock is rising right now after 2 weeks.
Yeah, I'm going to go with 2. Number 1, USC, obviously because of the win against LSU. What we've seen from their offense, Miller Moss, you talked about him. Woody Marks, another 100-yard game. But for them, I don't care who the opponent is. For USC to throw a shutout up there against Utah State, that speaks volumes to what D'Anton Lynn is doing with their defense. USC clearly is a team on the rise. Then I'll go a little bit more off the radar. I think there's a handful of teams we could pick from. I know you'll probably pick a couple of the teams that we just mentioned earlier when breaking down some of the big games. But Michigan State, there already has been a Big Ten game this year. Michigan State, I thought Maryland, with their talent at home against the Michigan State team and Jonathan Smith trying to instill his culture year number 1, for them to come back and win at Maryland 27-24, Aiden Childs had 3 interceptions, but he also, you could see his ability to get the ball downfield, 363 yards, 3 touchdowns. The freshman wide receiver, Nick Marsh, 194 yards in the game, 4 of his 8 catches and 151 of his 194 yards came in that fourth quarter. He looked like the real deal in that game. That is a huge... I'm shocked Michigan State went in there. That's a big win for Jonathan Smith and Aiden Childs, who's just a sophomore at quarterback. Like, that puts Michigan State a couple of steps ahead of where I thought they'd be at this time of the year, in year number 1 under Jonathan Smith. That's a team under the radar game, ended up being a great game, and it has implications because it's a conference game. Huge win for Michigan State.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was a great win. And 2, how they won, like you said, battling back, Childs throwing 3 picks. It's easy to kind of fold, let that, make you scared. He's kept pushing the ball down the field. like you said, some huge completions there, a big 44-yard touchdown late in the fourth quarters to tie the game, help lead Michigan State down the field for the game-winning field goal. Like that's like I'm with you. That's a great win, and that's a great promise for the future of what Aiden Childs can be a quarterback. And we know in college football, you have a quarterback, you have a chance. Really, really impressive win there for Michigan State. A good program-building win as they now go to 2-0, and they sit atop the Big Ten conference standings after 2 weeks, just like we all thought. Few teams whose stock is up. We talked about, like you said, Nebraska. Great win, nationally ranked now. They're taking care of business. Raiola is not making mistakes, which is good to see so far. They just obliterate Colorado in a game that I would say that was probably the most viewed Nebraska game in years. Now that there's actually reason and excitement around the program. How about
their fan support? I mean, their fans have always been awesome, but it shows you just how tough it can be to go to Lincoln and win a game in that stadium. Like, if they get rolling, that everyone's talked about it for years. And the question is, traditionally they could just get all these kids from the Midwest and from Nebraska and Oklahoma and Texas and mine that region. And in today's day and age of college football, well, where's the speed going to come from? Don't you have to recruit Florida? Don't you have to recruit the South? Don't you have to recruit certain areas? If there's something there, there's something there.
And I think the same could be said for Illinois, whereas really good program building win over number 19 Kansas, first non-conference ranked home victory since 2011. And speaking of home victory, the crowd, first sellout in 8 years. Crowd is buying in right now to what Bret Bielema is preaching. That's another one where, not that we viewed Illinois as this great home field advantage, but now again, you have fans believing, you have sellouts in Champaign. That is going to be a tough place to play and make Illinois now not the walkover that they've been for a large part of their Big Ten tenure. Two really, really, really impressive wins for Nebraska, Illinois, along with the two you said in USC and Michigan State. Holy cow, my apologies. One quick one here I want to mention before we get out of here. It was not an impressive win in terms of opponent. How about Indiana, though, smoking Western Illinois 77-3. Now 2-0 in the Kirk Cignetti era. They have a primetime game next week against UCLA on NBC. So that's going to be a really good opportunity for them to show them who they are. So far, Cignetti's bringing offensive explosion. He's bringing, I think, a buy-in to the program. It's with the win over FIU, now the win over Western Illinois. Again, not the opponents are very impressive, but how they're taking care of business. I think there's a reason right now to like where Indiana's going. Look at that.
All right, whose stock is falling in the Big Ten after 2 weeks?
Michigan. At least for me, that's one where I think we should have seen coming. But you look at now the replacements all over the offense and defense they have to make. The players that they are right now trying to replace, some of these all-American, all Big Ten players are just not playing at a high enough level. There's no quarterback consistency whatsoever. There's no quarterback threat even whatsoever in the pass game or the run game. They have just too many holes to plug, too many new guys filling in. Michigan, I thought, was overranked going into the year at 10. Yeah. And now when you look at how they played against Fresno State to win, not great. Now they get smoked by Texas. That's one where I think reality is hitting Michigan hard, and everyone got a good side of it on Saturday.
I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but let me just add this. Remaining schedule: hosting USC, at Illinois, hosting Oregon, at Ohio State. It's easy to see three more losses for Michigan, them ending as a 4 or 5 loss team this year. Just after that performance and what we've seen the first 2 weeks, it's still Michigan, still defending champ. I know I'm singing a different tune than I did on Thursday, and I don't know that it's an overreaction. They have some real questions, and if they don't play complementary football, they don't look like a team that's built to be maybe anyone that I just mentioned on their schedule right there.
I'm with you. Not an overreaction whatsoever. Do you have a team stock going down here to wrap up?
Wisconsin. I think they're 2-0, but they're going to host Alabama, right? Alabama just had trouble with USF, but they're going to host Alabama this weekend. They trailed against Western Michigan in the fourth quarter in week 1. They only led by 1 score late into that game against South Dakota. Granted, a really good FCS team, but it's an FCS team. Their run defense, a major concern. It does not look like they've taken that next step on offense. Even though they're 2-0, I think Wisconsin, for me, everyone was talking before the year. Rutgers, Nebraska, Wisconsin. Who are those teams on the rise? It does not look like Luke Fickell's team is going to round that corner in 2024.
And, not a great opponent here for week 3. Big noon kickoff coming to town. Alabama coming to town. Not exactly how you want to be playing so far in the biggest game of your season. That's a good one. That's a good one for sure. Even though they're 2-0, a lot of reason for concern. All right, so that'll do it for this week 2 wrap up here of the Still Enrolled podcast. Really appreciate you listening. Make sure you're subscribing on YouTube, Still Enrolled Podcast. Also, check us out wherever you do get your podcasts. We are now officially part of the Odyssey family, which means wherever you listen to your pods, we are there. Still Enrolled Podcast. Subscribe, comment, tell your friends about us. Friends love talking to other friends about Big Ten football. We love talking to you about Big Ten football. So tell your friends.
These are our friends that we're
us.
Talking to. You know that? We are talking to our friends.
Exactly right. So let's just open and expand the fan base.
Yeah.
There we go.
Thursday, we'll have Alabama at Wisconsin, Indiana 2-0 at UCLA, you just talked about, and then Oregon goes to Corvallis, where their rivals, Oregon State 2-0. Another interesting one for the Ducks coming up.
And even Washington State, another in-state Apple Cup rivalry. We got some good ones here in week number 3. So that's why you got to be subscribed so you don't miss any part of the action. Have a great rest of your week. We'll talk to you on Thursday right here on the Still Enrolled Podcast.